The accusation hit like a brick through silence. We were all gathered in the living room. Mom on the couch, Dad in his chair, aunts scattered around like they'd been waiting for this moment. And then my brother Pierce spoke my name clearly, calmly, as if he'd rehearsed it 1,000 times in the mirror. He said I'd spent years manipulating family relationships, that I positioned myself as the victim while turning people against each other. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He announced like he was reading facts from a report. My stomach dropped into freefall. I'm Scarlett, by the way. Scarlett Brooks. And in that second, I understood something irreversible had just happened. My entire body went still. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even shift in my seat. I just sat there, frozen, while he continued speaking like I wasn't a real person, like I was a problem being solved. The room filled that silence for me. Relatives began nodding. Aunt Nancy leaned forward, suddenly interested. Uncle Tom's expression shifted from confusion to something like recognition, like a puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. My brother leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, letting the room do his work. And I realized in that moment. He wasn't emotional. He was relieved. This was supposed to happen. This was the plan. The calculated, rehearsed, perfectly executed plan. The room rewrote history in real time. A conversation from 3 years ago suddenly meant something different. A disagreement became manipulation. Distance became strategy. Every moment I'd ever been quiet became evidence against me. My brother sat perfectly still, arms still crossed, letting the family do the work. He'd planted the seed, and now they were watering it with their own theories. Remember when she didn't come to Christmas? Aunt Nancy said. She was always so cold to everyone. That wasn't manipulation. I'd been working doubles that year. I couldn't afford gas to drive 6 hours home. But no one asked for details anymore. The narrative had already hardened. My brother didn't need to speak. He just watched. Every time someone made a connection, his shoulders relaxed a little more. He was winning and he wasn't even trying. Mom looked at me once, her expression unreadable. She wanted me to say something. Could see it. But I understood something she didn't yet. Defending myself right now would only feed the fire. Anything I said would be twisted into more evidence of manipulation. So I stayed silent. I let the room burn with accusations and theories. I let them build their case against me while I sat perfectly still, barely breathing, barely existing in that moment. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, staying quiet when every fiber of my being wanted to scream the truth. My brother smiled when he thought no one was looking. Just a small smile. Satisfied. Like he'd finally gotten what he wanted. Like all those years of planning had actually paid off. That night, alone in my apartment, I replayed his sentences over and over. They were too smooth. Too balanced. He didn't search for words. He delivered them like a lawyer presenting a case. Structured. Logical. Designed. I started remembering earlier conversations. Months earlier. He'd framed concerns about me as worry. Always privately, always gently. I'm just worried about you, Scarlett. The family is worried. Setting the groundwork. Building the narrative brick by brick. Tonight wasn't the beginning. It was the unveiling. I opened my laptop and started scrolling through old group messages. There, 6 months ago, Pierce had written something casual that contradicted what he'd said tonight. And there again a year ago he'd mentioned wanting to set the record straight about something I allegedly did. He'd been building this case for so long, and I'd been too busy living my life to notice. My hands shook as I scrolled. The realization was settling in slowly, like watching a photograph develop. He'd thought about this. He'd planned this. He'd written and rewritten his accusations until they sounded natural. He'd tested them on different people to see which version stuck. He'd practiced this. He'd probably practiced it with friends, refined it, tested different versions of the story to see which one stuck. This wasn't a spontaneous accusation. This was a campaign. This was someone who'd decided my reputation was worth destroying, and he'd committed to it fully. I realized something that made my chest tight. There must be multiple versions of this story already circulating. Different angles for different people. A tailored lie for everyone who mattered. Everyone in the family. Everyone at work who knew us both. Everyone who held any influence over my life. The next day I was at work when my phone buzzed. A text from my cousin Jamie. "Hey, Pierce called me yesterday. Just checking on you. Let me know if you need anything." That's when I knew. The lie wasn't contained to the living room. He was distributing it. I didn't know what he'd told Jamie, so I didn't respond. I just listened. And I waited. 2 days later, I accidentally overheard him on the phone in the hallway at Mom's house. I wasn't eavesdropping on purpose. I was just there picking up a package. But there he was, voice low, speaking to someone I couldn't identify. Same accusation. Different reasoning. The motive shifted to fit the listener. He sounded conversational, almost friendly. Like he was sharing genuine concern. But the facts kept changing. To one person I was manipulative out of jealousy. To another it was about control. To a third it was about attention and needing to be the center of family drama. The core lie stayed the same. But the details were liquid. They changed shape depending on who was listening. He was a master at this, taking the essential accusation and wrapping it in whatever emotion his audience would respond to. Fear, sympathy, anger. He adjusted his delivery based on the person on the other end of the line. I didn't interrupt. I just stood there in the hallway, listening as my brother remade reality to suit whoever he was talking to. He sounded so confident, so believable. But I noticed something. Lies that adapt depend on memory. And memory fails under pressure. Eventually, someone would catch the inconsistency. Eventually, someone would notice that his story didn't add up. You can't keep track of infinite variations. You can't remember which version you told to which person when the lies are this complicated. He mentioned a date that doesn't exist. April 15th, 2 years ago, when something allegedly happened between us. But I knew I'd checked that I was out of state that entire week. The lie was already cracking. 2 weeks passed. Then came the next family gathering, a Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Conversations slowed when I walked in. Actually slowed. People who used to hug me just nodded. My brother didn't look at me. Instead, he studied everyone else, watching their reactions like a scientist observing an experiment. He was tracking who believed him, who was still undecided, who needed a little more pressure. I noticed one aunt, Aunt Susan, watching him instead of me. Her expression was tightening, narrowing into something like doubt. And when Pierce repeated his story for what must have been the 100th time, she didn't nod along with the others. She just watched him. She watched his hands, his eyes, the way he breathed between sentences. Doubt arrives quietly, without announcement. It doesn't come as a sudden realization. Comes as a small question that grows. Why does he keep telling this story? Why so many times? Why does it change slightly each time? If something is true, why do you need to keep repeating it? And Susan almost said something. Could see it. Her mouth opened just slightly, like she was about to ask a question. Then she looked at Pierce's face, saw something there. Saw the desperation beneath the performance, and decided not to. She closed her mouth and looked away. But she'd seen it. The crack in the foundation. And once you see a crack, you can't unsee it. My brother felt it too. He started talking louder, more animated. Trying to reclaim the narrative before it slipped away from him completely. His voice had that edge to it. That desperation of someone who knows they're losing their audience. Late at night, I scrolled through years of old messages. Not to collect ammunition. Not to build a case. Just to observe. To understand. To see where the truth had bent. Tone shift. Emotional pressure. Taming. I found patterns in his language that I'd missed before. The way he'd escalate small disagreements into major issues. The way he'd reframe my silence as coldness and indifference. The way he'd position himself as the reasonable one who was just trying to help a sister who clearly had problems. And then I found it. A message from Pierce, dated 8 months ago. He was texting me about something Mom had said at dinner. And in that message, he wrote something that directly contradicted his entire accusation against me. He wrote, "I know you're dealing with a lot. I'm not mad. I just wanted you to know I see what you're trying to do for the family." What I was trying to do for the family. Positive. Supportive. It was impossible to twist that into evidence of manipulation. The words didn't even fit the narrative he was now spreading. I stared at that message for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screenshot button. But I didn't take it. I didn't forward it to anyone. I didn't save it where he could see that I'd saved it. I didn't even back it up to the cloud. Untouched evidence is harder to dismiss. Stays hidden. Wait. It exists without being weaponized. I started looking through more messages. And I realized this wasn't unique. There were dozens of moments where Pierce had written things that contradicted his current narrative. Dozens of pieces of evidence that proved his story was constructed. He'd built an entire false foundation, and the real truth was still here in these messages, archived and waiting. Pierce became louder, more animated. He started showing up to every family event, suddenly invested in being present. He joked about how sensitive I'd always been, how hard it is to talk to me, how I take everything the wrong way. Laughter followed, but it was uneven, forced. The kind of laughter that people give when they're not entirely sure they should be laughing, but they don't want to seem uncomfortable or argumentative. He was repeating himself now. The same accusations, the same stories, trying to anchor the lie through familiarity. The more you hear something, the more real it becomes. That was his strategy. Repetition equals truth. Frequency equals fact. But I noticed something else. People were getting tired. The excitement of the drama was wearing off, and repetition wasn't fueling it anymore. It was just background noise now. White noise. The boy who cried wolf, except the wolf was his sister, and people were starting to wonder why he kept crying about her. Someone laughed too late when Pierce made a joke about me. Just a second too late. They'd had to think about whether they should laugh, and by the time they decided to, the moment had passed. It was awkward, visible. Everyone noticed. Pierce noticed it too. His smile flickered. For just a moment the mask slipped and I saw the real thing underneath. Panic. Fear. The recognition that his control was slipping away like sand through his fingers. A week later, my cousin Logan pulled me aside at another gathering. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd been holding this question in for a while. Like it had been eating at him. "Why haven't you defended yourself?" he asked quietly. "Everyone's saying all this stuff about you. Don't you want to, explain?" I looked at him for a moment. Then I answered evenly without emotion. "Because the truth doesn't need practice." I walked away before he could respond. By that evening, I heard the sentence repeated back to me. Someone had said it to someone else, who'd said it to someone else. It had already started traveling through the family like a virus. A good virus. The kind that carries healing instead of sickness. And my brother heard it. I knew he heard it because the next time I saw him, something had shifted in his face. The confidence was still there, but underneath it was something else. Uncertainty. The feeling that the momentum was changing. The quiet power of people starting to believe in something they couldn't quite articulate yet. 3 days later, Pierce texted me. The message was polite, careful, almost conciliatory. He suggested we talk privately and clear up misunderstandings. He said he valued our relationship and didn't want things to be like this between us. It was the kind of message designed to look reasonable. The kind of thing that, if I'd been paying attention, would have seemed like an olive branch. But I knew what it really was. It wasn't an apology. I understood that immediately. It was containment. He wanted control of the timing and the narrative. He wanted to meet me alone, where he could reframe everything, where he could convince me to accept some blame so he could say we'd worked it out. I didn't respond. The next day he texted again. Same message, slightly more direct. More urgent. Still nothing. 2 days later, the third message came through. And this one lost its softness. The mask was slipping. "Scarlett, we need to talk about this. People are taking sides and it's hurting the family. Call me." The desperation was leaking through now. The control that had felt so solid, so absolute, was eroding. He was losing control of the narrative, and he knew it. And he was starting to panic. In a group discussion at my parents' house, Pierce made a mistake. He referenced a family decision from 7 years ago, something about my parents buying their second car, and he claimed I'd influenced it behind the scenes. He said I'd manipulated Mom into spending money the way I wanted. He was trying to show a pattern, trying to make it seem like I'd been doing this for years. But he named people who were present, people with actual memories, people who could fact-check him in real time. The lie stretched beyond what he could manage. It was too ambitious, too sprawling. He'd gotten caught in the momentum of his own storytelling. Dad looked confused. "Pierce, I made that decision. Scarlett had nothing to do with it." Pierce backtracked quickly, but it was too late. The crack was visible now. The lie had been so ambitious that it had broken under its own weight. Everyone saw it. Everyone understood that something was wrong. Someone asked him to clarify the timeline, to explain how the dates fit together, to make sense of what he was claiming. He couldn't. 2 days later, a relative approached me privately. It was Aunt Susan, the one I'd seen doubting him before. She admitted that Pierce had told her a completely different version of events about 6 months ago. Back then, his accusation had been about something else entirely. A completely different offense with a completely different explanation. She'd been confused ever since, not understanding how the story could change so drastically. She wasn't confrontational about it, just confused, just looking for an explanation that made sense. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even deny what she was saying. Instead, I asked her one calm question. "Do you think someone would need to change their story if the original version was true?" And then I let it sit between us. She didn't answer right away. But I could see the moment the thought settled into her mind. The moment she really started wondering about my brother's credibility. The moment doubt became certainty. That night, she asked me if I'd kept records of our conversations, if I'd documented things. She was starting to think about evidence now, about proof. Pierce doubled down. But now he wasn't providing specifics anymore. He started speaking in broad terms. Always. Everyone. For years. The concrete details had vanished, replaced by vague accusations designed to overwhelm rather than explain. Truth narrows under pressure, becomes specific, detailed, concrete, verifiable. But lies blur. They generalize. They hide in the shadows of language where they can't be pinned down and examined too closely. I watched him at family events and I could see the difference. He was panicking. The confidence was wearing thin. He was trying to overwhelm the room with the sheer volume of his claims, hoping people would just accept it all because he sounded so sincere. But sincerity and truth aren't the same thing. And people were starting to realize that. They were starting to understand that you can sound genuine and still be lying. That conviction and accuracy aren't the same. Someone suggested a full family meeting. Let everyone sit down and talk this through. Get everything out in the open. No more whispers. No more versions being distributed separately. Pierce's face went pale for just a second. Then he recovered. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We need to settle this." But his hands were shaking. And everyone noticed. The family agreed. It was time to settle everything openly. No more whispers. No more private conversations. Everything would be addressed at once. A date was chosen. 2 weeks away. The announcement came at a Sunday dinner. And everyone nodded like this was the right call. Like this was the only way forward. Pierce sounded confident, even upbeat. He insisted on speaking first. "That way everything can be on the table," he said. "No confusion." I said almost nothing. I just nodded and excused myself early, saying I had work the next morning. But that night, alone in my apartment, I did something I'd been avoiding. Gathered everything. Old messages, old texts, voicemails, timeline inconsistencies. The things he'd said to different people. The things he'd said to me privately that contradicted what he was saying publicly. I didn't do it to hurt him. I did it because I realized something. I'd been so focused on not defending myself that I hadn't actually paid attention to what evidence I had. What proof existed of his lies. And there was a lot of it. More than I'd realized. The paper trail of his deception was extensive. Pierce thanked me for being reasonable in a text. He said he appreciated that I was willing to talk this through like adults. He said he knew it would be hard but that this was the right thing to do. I didn't respond. I just kept organizing the evidence. Methodically, carefully, getting everything ready. The night before the meeting he called. His voice was careful, almost gentle, like he was approaching a frightened animal. He asked if I was planning to bring anything up in the meeting, if I had things I wanted to say. I told him no. It was the truth. I didn't need to bring anything. Everything was already here. The evidence, the timeline, the contradictions. It was all just waiting to be seen. It was all just waiting for the right moment. He relaxed. I could hear it in his voice. Relief flooded through the phone line like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. "Thank you," he said. "I know this is hard, but I think if we can just talk through it calmly, everyone will understand that this has all been a big misunderstanding." I didn't tell him that he was the misunderstanding. That clarity was coming whether he was ready for it or not. The meeting happened in the living room, same place as the original accusation. Pierce opened smoothly. He sounded prepared, sincere, composed. He gave context. He explained his concerns. He positioned himself as someone who'd been suffering in silence, finally brave enough to speak up. Heads nodded. For a moment, the room leaned his way. He was good at this. I had to give him credit. He was convincing. He knew how to work a room. But then someone asked him to repeat a date. A specific date from one of his stories. He did confidently. Then someone else mentioned a different version they'd heard months ago. Different date. A different context. The air tightened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Pierce corrected himself instantly. Too instantly. "Sorry, I misspoke. It was actually." But the correction contradicted something else he'd said earlier in the same speech. Something he'd literally said 5 minutes ago. Another relative mentioned a different version. And another. All the different versions he'd distributed, all the adapted lies he'd tailored for specific audiences, were suddenly being brought back to the same table at the same time. His expression shifted. The composure cracked just slightly. The mask was slipping. Someone asked to see messages. Text evidence. Proof. Concrete evidence that could be examined and understood. Screenshots appeared. Not from me. From Aunt Susan. She'd kept records of the different stories he'd told her. Different dates. Different explanations. Same core accusation, but the details never matched. The room went silent. Actually silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy. The kind of silence that sounds like a verdict. Pierce's posture stiffened. His jaw clenched. He started to say that the screenshots were taken out of context, but even he didn't sound convinced. Even he could hear how hollow that excuse sounded. A voicemail played. Someone had recorded Pierce weeks ago, making the same accusation but with a completely different explanation. The voice was his. The tone was his. But the story was different. His accusations collided audibly now. All the careful versions, all the tailored lies, crashing into each other in front of everyone who mattered. The narrative was fragmenting in real time. He started interrupting people. Getting defensive. Angry. The controlled performance was falling apart. The mask was gone now. He finally looked directly at me. For the first time all day our eyes met. And I could see the moment he realized. I'd had him the whole time. I'd been watching. I'd been waiting. I'd let him dig himself deeper and deeper without saying a word. All eyes turned to me. The room was waiting. They wanted to hear what I would say. After everything, after hearing the contradictions and the lies laid bare, they wanted to hear from me. I spoke briefly, confirmed dates. I answered the questions that had been asked. I didn't accuse him of anything. I didn't need to. I just told the truth, and the truth was already loud enough. The contrast was undeniable. Me calm, factual, controlled. Him, angry, defensive, incoherent. You could see the difference. Everyone in that room could see it. The room saw it. Everyone in that living room understood exactly what had happened. One person had been lying. One person had been telling the truth. And the distance between those two things was measurable. Someone asked him why he'd lied. Pierce tried. He blamed stress. He blamed confusion. He blamed his memory failing him. He said he'd gotten caught up in his own narrative and lost track of what was real. It wasn't an apology. It was an explanation designed to make people feel sorry for him, to reframe his lies as a mental health issue rather than a choice he'd made deliberately. But the evidence didn't argue back. Simply existed. Screenshots, voicemails, contradictions. All of it just sat there, undeniable and solid. You couldn't explain it away with a meditation app or a therapist's diagnosis. And no one stepped in to protect him. No one said, "Well, he's going through a hard time." No one tried to soften the blow or give him an out. The room didn't have sympathy for him anymore. The family just looked at him and saw him clearly for maybe the first time in years. The room went quiet in a new way. Not the silence of shock anymore. The silence of realization. The silence of understanding. My dad, who hadn't said much all meeting, started talking. He calmly summarized everything. The contradictions. Timelines. The way Pierce had repeated the same accusations with different details. The way he'd distributed different versions to different people. He spoke neutrally. He wasn't angry. He was just laying out facts. And hearing it spoken that way, hearing someone else say it all out loud, dismantled what was left of Pierce's defense. The narrative fell apart completely. He tried one final explanation. One last attempt to reclaim control of the story. His last version contradicted his first completely. The original claim, the thing he'd said in this very room weeks ago, was now being actively refuted by his own mouth. He was defeating himself. No one interrupted. We just let him talk. We let him keep digging until even he could see the hole he was in. Until the contradiction was so obvious that there was no way to unsee it. When he finished, silence settled heavily. The kind of silence that sounds like a door closing. The kind of silence that means it's over. Someone said my name. Quietly. Not angry. Just acknowledging me. Seeing me. Finally seeing me clearly. I spoke clearly and briefly. Facts only. No accusations. No anger. I didn't need those things. I laid out what had happened. Timeline. The inconsistencies. The ways his story had changed. I explained. Not to convince them because they were already convinced, but to make sure the truth was audible. That it was stated. That it was recorded in everyone's memory. The room accepted it easily. The narrative had already shifted. The evidence had already done the work. When I finished, I stayed quiet. Pierce stood up suddenly. He didn't say anything. He just left the room. No explanation. No apology. No goodbye. Just absence. The sound of a chair scraping back. A step. The click of the front door. The apologies came later. Mostly private. My mom pulled me aside and cried. My dad squeezed my shoulder and didn't let go for a long time. Relatives texted. "I'm sorry we believed him. Thank you for not fighting back." But trust doesn't snap back like a rubber band. Reorients. Settles into a different shape. The way people looked at me changed. The way they looked at Pierce changed too. He stopped attending family gatherings. No announcement. No explanation. Just absence. He became a ghost in the family. A person everyone knew but no one talked about. His name stopped coming up naturally in conversations. Months passed. Holidays came and went. His empty chair at the table became something no one even remarked on anymore. It was like his absence had weight, and that weight was its own kind of consequence. Someone asked me how I stayed calm, how I didn't break, how I didn't scream or fight back or do something I'd regret. They wanted to understand the discipline, the strength. I thought about that question for a long time before answering. Alone in my apartment one night, I reflected on everything that had happened. The accusation, the silence, the waiting, evidence, the meeting, the exposure, the absence, and I understood something about power that I hadn't known before. Something deeper than anger or vindication. Silence wasn't weakness. It was discipline. I didn't expose Pierce. I let his own words do that. I didn't destroy him. He dug carefully, confidently, believing no one was watching. But I was watching. I was always watching. And when the truth surfaced, it didn't need my voice to stand. The evidence spoke. His own contradictions spoke. The pattern of his lies spoke louder than any accusation I could have made. He'd come at me with anger and confidence and a carefully constructed narrative. And I'd answered with silence and observation and patience. I'd met his deception with clarity. I'd met his performance with calm. In the end, he lost everything. His credibility, his place in the family, his reputation, his brother, the relationships he'd spent years building. And I didn't have to do anything but wait. That's the kind of win people never see coming. The kind that looks like surrender but is actually strategy. The kind that beats you down not with force, but with the irrefutable truth of who you actually are. It's the kind of victory that doesn't require weapons or anger or revenge in any traditional sense. Silence, I learned, is the most powerful weapon. Not because it gives you control, but because it gives them all of it. And some people, when given enough rope, will hang themselves. They'll keep talking. They'll keep adapting their lies. They'll keep digging deeper until the hole is so deep they can never climb out. The truth has a way of surfacing. It always does. You just have to be patient enough to let it. And I always have been.